y'all test the mic? Okay, I'm going to do a mic test for everybody on Zoom. If y'all can hear me on Zoom, please raise your hand. Ryan, are there any hands raised? Also true. So if you're on Zoom, we're trying to test to make sure that the sound is coming through this microphone so you don't get a lot of room noise. So we're trying to test to make sure the mic's working. So if you're on Zoom, there's a little button, should be at the bottom of your screen, and it'll let you raise your hand. If you can find the button to raise your hand, then we'll be able to see if you can hear me. Oh, fantastic. So that should be working. Thank you all for your patience while we get some tech worked out. This is a super pretty room and a space that I love to be in. We're excited about our preservation plan, but our consultants are here to share more about that with you. I'm Britton Bostick. I'm the city's long-range planning and special projects manager, but more importantly, Steph McDougall and Emily Reed are here from Stantec Consulting Services and McDougall Preservation, and they're going to lead us through what our planning process is going to look like. And then we've got a great exercise we'd like for you to participate in with us. If you're watching on Zoom, please know that we're going to have a survey, and then we'll have ways for you to interact as well, so don't feel like you're left out. There's lots of work to be done, and we're excited to have y'all join us for it. So thank you, Steph, and looking forward to hearing about it.
Great. Thanks, Britton. Thanks, everyone. Welcome. Hopefully you all can hear me just fine. I'll use my lifeguard voice if I have to. There will be no running. We're really excited to be here this evening. I'm Steph McDougall with McDougall Preservation, historic preservation consulting firm out of Houston, Texas. And with me is Emily Reed, who's the project manager for this project out of Austin, Texas with Stantec. You'll see and hear me a lot here at the very beginning of this project because I am managing community outreach, and then it will be the Emily and team show. After that, you won't really see me so much, but I'm super excited to be back in Arkansas. I previously worked with Preserve Arkansas when it was the Historic Preservation Alliance of Arkansas back in, I think 2010 or 2012, when they were updating their strategic plan for the next 10 to 20 years, and fell in love with the state then. I'm actually having breakfast with Vanessa McEwen tomorrow, if you know Vanessa from her time with Preserve Arkansas. And we're just super excited to be here and working with Britton, who is fantastic. And thank you all for coming. Okay. Okay. I have pressed like 3 buttons, so if it's taking a second, it may advance through a bunch of slides. There we go. Sorry, I will try using the mouse. How about that? Okay, so let me tell you about the exercise that we have for you today. This is for people in the room and you folks on Zoom as well. So if you're here in the room with me today, we have these 4 posters over here, and when you came in, you received stickers numbered 1 through 4. What we would like for you to do when the meeting is over is to vote for your preservation priorities, giving us a sense of what your main goals are for historic preservation here in Fayetteville by placing the appropriately numbered sticker on your first priority, second priority, third priority, and fourth priority. You can also do this on Zoom as well. In the chat, please write 1B, 2C, etc., and let us know what your priorities are that way, and our staff will be tallying those as you go throughout the meeting. They are, number 1, promote historic tourism. That's something we've heard a lot about, a lot of interest in from stakeholders so far. Number 2, document and protect historic properties. Number 3, educate people about Fayetteville's history and how historic preservation works. And 4, regulate demolition and redevelopment in established neighborhoods. And I know you've had a bunch of that already. We've heard that that's a concern. But let us know how these rank as far as you're concerned. And then we'll also be around after the meeting to talk to you all about those ideas and other things. Yes, sir.
If you had a concern, if you were living in a historic house or property, and you were concerned about what's going on around it and how that could be controlled to protect the historic nature of your property, does that fall under B or D? Or is that even considered?
Well, so the gentleman asked if you are living in a historic area or near a historic area and you're concerned about things being torn down or things happening around your neighborhood, would that be B or D? That would be D, redevelopment. B is about documenting historic properties through things like historic resource surveys, National Register nominations, local landmark designations, etc. But that's a great question. Thanks for asking. Okay, so let me tell you who is working on this project for you. You've met me and Emily. We've got some great folks on the Stantec team who are architectural historians like us. Also, probably one of the most gifted GIS specialists you'll ever meet, Sarah Lawrence, who handles all of the spatial data and will be creating charts and maps and things like that for the final preservation plan document, and Sandy Shannon, who is Emily's right-hand person at Stantec. So Stantec is the prime consultant for this project. They are really responsible for the entire project. I am working on community engagement for them, and that's something that Emily and I partner on quite frequently, where they'll have the whole project and I work on this part of it. They are also going to do the analysis of existing conditions and develop the whole plan for you. All right, so just so that we are all on the same page to start with, let's talk about some basics. First of all, what is a heritage and historic preservation plan? A preservation plan is a foundational document that we use in historic preservation. And typically, this is done at the point where Fayetteville is at right now, where you have done a little bit of historic preservation, but not the full spectrum of all the different things you could do. And you need to know what is possible, what should we be prioritizing, in what order, how much is it going to cost, and those sorts of things. Also, what sequence do some of these things have to take place in? Because there are things that have to happen before you can do some other things. And so we'll be talking about that in the preservation plan as well. Importantly, this is data-driven and community-driven. We do know what the best practices are in historic preservation, and we'll bring you examples of those from around the United States, from peer cities and cities that are doing a really, really great job of this kind of thing. But primarily, this is going to be driven by what the community tells us they want, what you want. We're not coming in to tell you what we think should happen. We're just providing information about what you might choose to do. And one of the things that we'll be asking is for your input on some more specifics through a survey, and I'll get to that in a moment. A historic preservation plan is a typical city planning document. It's designed to provide guidance. They are adopted by city council, and then the city staff, in this case the historic preservation staff, would be charged with implementing it over the course of generally about 10 years, and then you update it. So this is your first preservation plan, which is very exciting. And the thing that it's really going to do is give you a framework for the work that will follow. So, for example, we may say you need to have a historic preservation ordinance that does these three things, but we won't be writing that ordinance as part of this project. That's out of the scope of this project. We'll be laying the groundwork for additional work to be done going down the road. It also establishes a framework for how you, as a community, want to protect historic resources and steward them for future generations. So we'll be asking you questions like, what do you want to see preserved and protected for your grandchildren in Fayetteville? And how would you like to see that done? And like we said, it really is about a decade's worth of looking forward. That's realistic. I mean, I think, as you can see, 10 years ago, we never would have guessed we would have been in the situation we're in now with COVID and all kinds of other things. So 10 years is a really good horizon for us for this kind of plan. We've got some specific things that we're going to work through. The analysis portion of it, I am going to read these because we've got people on Zoom, and I want to make sure that everyone, regardless of your visual abilities, can understand what we're saying. So the first thing we do is analyze the current conditions. We're going to look at existing land use patterns and what is already in your historic neighborhoods that's historically significant, architecturally significant. We're also looking at what has happened in the past. We've heard that there have been several attempts to do more with historic preservation. I heard that Stephen Smith was very involved. We know that the Washington Willow Historic District considered or was working toward an ordinance at some point. That got derailed by COVID. So we're looking at those past efforts, what happened, why things did or didn't work well, what did you do, and how that's working. The next thing we're going to do is identify the places in Fayetteville that are the most historically or culturally significant. And when we say significant, we use that in a very specific way that has a very focused meaning within historic preservation. For something to be significant, it has to qualify for either the National Register of Historic Places or a local designation or for a landmark or a historic district. So significance has a really specific definition for us in historic preservation. It doesn't just mean important, although that's one aspect. You're going to have a whole bunch of things, and we've driven around the city now. We've taken a look at some different neighborhoods, and certainly there are historic resources all over Fayetteville. The question is, how do you want to prioritize them? Which ones do you want to try to preserve and protect? And in what order do you want to approach that? For some of these, they may be a little bit more threatened, and so we would want to potentially attend to those sooner rather than later. But we'll be looking at all of them and giving you some ideas for how that prioritization could work. Finally, we put together strategies to preserve everything. We'll have a great, very easy to read, very accessible preservation plan. You're not going to see jargon or architect talk or planner words, unless we absolutely have to use those, in which case we'll explain what they mean and give you some examples, but it's going to be really accessible. And finally, it's also going to recommend best practices. So we have colleagues all over this country who are doing amazing work in historic preservation. We want to bring those examples to you so you can see what they're doing and decide if that's something you might be also interested in. The plan is going to have these components. It'll start with an executive summary. TLDR, if you do not want to read it, the whole thing, you just want the highlights, that's what the executive summary is for. We're going to get into an assessment of these cultural and historic resources, identifying what you've got, what is the condition, where are those pockets of historic resources in neighborhoods throughout the city. We'll talk about the community engagement process, in part because your city council people are going to want to know, who did we talk to? What did you tell us? How many people participated? Okay? That's really important. So it's really great that you showed up today. And please continue to invite your friends and encourage your neighbors to become involved. We'll identify your challenges. And I know you know that you've got some, but also opportunities. We'll talk about potential partnerships and different resources that you can access, including financial support in some cases. And of course, we'll make very specific recommendations at a strategic level, and then get into the action items. Those are your tactical tasks and activities for how you could implement this plan going forward. Okay, so that's really kind of pretty much what plans do. They tell you what you've got, what you could do with it, how you could do those things, and then set you up with an implementation plan, a path forward for how to do it. Now, we have a bunch of different questions that we're considering as we go through this process. Again, I'm going to read these if it's hard for people on Zoom to see, just so we all know what they say. First of all, should regulations and design review requirements be implemented for private properties? There are a lot of different ways to do this. There can be some really light regulations. Some cities have a lot of regulations. It's a mix. So there are a lot of different ways to get at this. So please don't think, regulations, that's going to be the worst thing ever, because it doesn't have to be a bad thing, okay? It all depends on what you all want to do. Number 2, would any neighborhoods benefit from or want historic zoning protections? Number 3, are there historic sites, individual historic sites that we need to know about? Maybe we don't know about those yet, and you want to tell us. Great. We want you to. Number 4, do we need to offer more education or resources on how to maintain or repair historic properties? We get this a lot when we go out and talk to communities about historic preservation. We can't find someone to repair our wood windows. Who does porches? Where can I find millwork that would match what I've got on my house now? I have a part that's rotten and I just need to replace it. Okay, so we're going to look at that. Number 5, do we need additional online resources? Are those warranted? In some cases, you may need to have more information that's available to the community on the Historic Preservation website. Number 6, how much do we know about our history? Especially for people who are moving into Fayetteville, who are new to this community, who might not have a background in its history, how can we convey that to them in a way that makes them more interested in it? Do we need a city historic marker program? Some cities love those. There are ways to do that, by the way, without putting a plaque on a stake in your front yard. And we're seeing people do sidewalk decals and all kinds of interesting things that are possible now with the technology that we have that we couldn't have done 5 or even 10 years ago. Number 8, have we identified our historic neighborhoods, or is more survey work needed? And I know you've had historic resources surveys done before, but it was a while ago. Probably need to update those with all of the development that's been going on. Number 9, what kind of grant funding and grant projects are we eligible for, or do we want to be eligible for? Got to get the cash if we want to do the work, right? And finally, how does the statewide historic preservation plan aid in guiding this work that we'll undertake, or in the grant funding that we're going to be seeking for the next 5 years? So the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program has their own plan that's just like this, except on the statewide level. And that influences what kinds of grants they give and what kind of programs they prioritize. How does this plan fit into that? Or does it? Does Fayetteville need to, use that as a jumping off point? All right, so community engagement, we have been at it, y'all. We have been at it already. We have been talking to you folks out in the community. I have done interviews on the phone with several members of this audience as well as other folks, and have gotten so much good information. All the hot goss, all the intel. I've been getting all of it, but really good information about what areas of town are under development pressure? What kinds of things would you like to see? Now, we're going to take that information, and we don't just say, oh, I talked to 7 people, and now I know everything there is to know about Fayetteville. We take that information, and we use that to identify what are the issues and concerns that we need to investigate more fully with the entire community. And that's what we'll be doing with the survey that's going to be published in just the next few days online. It's going to be published through the Speak Up city website, okay? So you can get on there and fill that out. And that's where we really take these ideas that we've heard about, some other questions that we have, and we want to understand the extent to which some of the things that we've heard about from a few people might represent the community as a whole or don't, okay? So if we heard from a few people something, we'll test that and see, is this really a concern for a large number of people or just for these few people? And we'll find that out. And finally, community meetings like this get you together with us. It's so important for us to talk to you, hear what you have to say, to get your feedback and your input. So thank you again for doing this. Emily's going to be back in the future to lead you through another one of these meetings when we have some more to show you. But for tonight, we're gathering your feedback, and then when we come back, we'll have more to tell you about what we've learned so far, and we'll get your feedback on that. So you'll be able to say, oh, but you're missing this part, or you also need to know about this other thing. Okay, so when is this all going to be done? Well, it's about a year-long project. You can see we kicked it off this summer. The conditions analysis has already been completed. Right now, we're doing the community engagement that consists of the stakeholder interviews and the community survey and this meeting. We're also starting to draft the plan itself, the plan document. That's going to continue through the winter. And then in the spring, or the end of the winter and the spring, you'll get to see it, make comments on it. We'll make some changes based on your comments. You'll get to see how what you told us, your feedback, is reflected in the revised plan. And then as we go into next summer, that's when we'll get into the plan adoption process. And this presentation is already online, right? Because we did a version of this for the Historic District Commission and the Black Heritage Preservation Commission a couple weeks ago. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation. I'm, in and out, not going to take up all your time this evening. I will say this. If you have questions, I'd be happy to take them now. If we have questions on Zoom, we'll take those now. If you don't want to wait around for questions and answers and you want to go ahead and vote, you can do that. That's fine. That's not going to be a problem. And just ask that you try to stay in this area because we still have cameras on. And so I want to make sure that the people who are watching on Zoom on the live stream, aren't getting their view blocked as much. But if anybody needs to skedaddle now, you can go ahead and do that. I know it's the end of the workday. You've got families, dogs to let out, that whole thing, okay? So, but if not, we'll do questions and answers. And here's how I do questions and answers. I'm not going to give any of you the microphone. Nobody gets it. It's mine, all mine. We're going to take questions from Zoom first, and then I will start at the back of the room. I'm going to ask every single one of you if you have a question or comment. And if you don't, that's fine. But if you do, you can ask me. I'm going to repeat back to you what I think you said, and that way you can tell me if I got it right, and then I'll answer your question. I know we have all been in those meetings where you ask someone from a government agency a question, and they give you the answer that they have prepared to give, whether that had anything to do with your questions or not. I know that doesn't happen here in Fayetteville, but we've seen it in other places. So I want to make sure I don't do that. So I'm going to have you ask me the question. I'll make sure I understand what you're asking, and then I'll answer it. And if we can't answer it, Britton might be able to answer it, or Jonathan, or if none of us can answer it, we'll take your name, we'll make sure that we get an answer for you. Okay? And then we'll be around after this is over. We're going to stick around till 7. So if you want to talk to us about anything having to do with this project, that would be fine. Does that all sound okay? Okay. Nobody is sprinting for the exits, which is great. So, Britton, do we have questions from Zoom?
Not yet, but I'm not sure that we haven't figured out quite how we would make that facilitate yet. So maybe we'll take questions.
Yeah, we'll do questions from out here. Let me get a quick drink and then we'll start. Okay, we're going to start at the back, at this corner with the gentleman in the cap with the C on it. Do you have any questions for us today?
Yeah, but I don't know how to ask it.
Well,
one of my concerns is I'm a historian. I teach history. And I do projects on the history of Fayetteville. I am also a citizen. And I have real concerns about some of the things I see going on in the city. One is the fact that housing prices are going through the roof. And this is becoming a town in which working people, poor people, don't feel welcome. And when I hear people talking about development pressures in a bad way, it causes me worries.
okay.
And we live in a city that needs more housing, lots more housing everywhere. And I just don't want historic preservation to become a way for some people to protect the style of life at the expense of others.
Okay.
And I don't know what my question is here, but
I know what your question is.
okay, tell me.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is historic preservation going to prevent Fayetteville from being able to respond to, number one, this increasing need for more housing, but also the need for affordable housing? Is historic preservation going to get in the way of things that this city desperately needs at this point? Is that a reasonable?
Yeah, but also is historic preservation a way to create economic segregation in the town?
Okay, so is historic preservation?
Part of it.
Okay, so he said another part of it is historic preservation a way to create economic segregation? Those are really great questions. Here's what I can tell you. Affordable housing is absolutely one of the goals of historic preservation. Okay, so a lot of times when we think of historic preservation, we think of big fancy houses, right, that some rich man lived in, and that's why they're important. But that was true in like 1970, in the 1980s. That's the kind of historic preservation that we were doing because that was the low-hanging fruit. So, but that's not what we're doing today. So historic preservation is absolutely focused on preventing gentrification, preventing displacement, yes, preserving affordable housing. And one way that you preserve affordable housing is by helping people stay in small homes, right? Because when you tear down a craftsman house, which can be very affordable, and you put up 3, skinnies, on that same property, then yes, those housing prices begin to shoot up because the craftsman house is on a piece of land that becomes valued for its development potential, not for the house that's on it. We come from cities where this is happening all the time, and historic preservation is making it possible for people to preserve those smaller houses, to live in affordable, smaller houses without that development pressure, because the developers aren't allowed to do those tear downs and build up those multiplexes and texplexes and things in that neighborhood, because it's a historic district. So I think your concern is, I understand your concern. I hope you'll let us show you how historic preservation can be a solution to those concerns instead of part of the problem. Does that sound fair? Yeah. Okay, give us that chance. Okay, thank you. All right, ma'am, do you have a question? Okay, sir. All right, ma'am. Ma'am?
I do. Could you elaborate on regulate demolitions and redevelopment in established neighborhoods? What do you mean by that? Just elaborate on that.
Sure. So the basic concept is that one of the things that historic preservation can do, doesn't have to do, but can do, is regulate when you can tear something down and the process that you have to go through to do that. Okay, so I know, for example, that y'all had a big house, the old stone house in Washington Willow on Lafayette, that fell into terrible disrepair and it was torn down. Well, many historic preservation ordinances have a clause that prevents what we call demolition by neglect, which is what happened there, for example. That's a way that you can regulate demolition, is to not let property owners purposefully, and I don't know what the intention of those property owners were, but sometimes we'll have property owners who intentionally let their properties deteriorate and then come and say, oh, it's too expensive for me to save now, right? And that's a code enforcement issue. But when we put that in the historic preservation ordinance, it becomes a historic preservation issue as well. Now, the flip side to that is we also include economic hardship clauses. So if you are a person who is, for example, maybe elderly or disabled or disadvantaged economically, that if you don't have the money to do things, there's a way to show that, and then that becomes part of the decision-making factor, right? When you want to do something that maybe might not have been allowed for somebody that has more means. So that's one way that we can regulate demolitions. Another thing that you'll see a lot is either a waiting period before someone can demolish something after they apply for a permit to do that, to give the community a chance to see if that building could be saved. Or some cities say, if the commission says you can't tear it down, then you can't tear it down. Now, there are different ways of managing that. There are different bars for, what has to happen, or, how strict those regulations are. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. But that's why we're going to bring you a bunch of best practices to show you these are the different options that you might have if one of the things that you want to do is regulate demolitions in some way. The same thing for redevelopment in established neighborhoods. One of the things that historic preservation ordinances typically do is regulate scale and massing. And that means kind of the size and the volume of a building. So I have a whole set of slides that we didn't bring on scale and massing, where you'll have little house, gigantic house, little house, little house, little house, right? That's a scale and massing situation where this big giant new house doesn't fit in with the neighborhood. It's incompatible with this historic neighborhood. So that's typically the main thing that historic preservation ordinances regulate, is scale and massing. You don't want to have the house next door to you have the foundation start here if that's where your windows look out, right? And sometimes that happens. People will build their foundation way up and not necessarily for flooding issues, just because they want that kind of French Quarter, raised look. And then that's what you're looking out at, is concrete to here, next door. So there are a lot of different ways that we can regulate redevelopment. And that's really, again, going to be based on what is it that the community wants. Do you want to regulate like the size of something? And to your point, sir, about density and, how do we get more housing in here? Being able to develop garage apartments, accessory dwelling units, also on the same property. That's really common in historic neighborhoods now. 20 years ago, people would have been, shocked. There would have been pearls clutched at the idea that, you would create this garage apartment, build a second story so people could live there in a back house. But that's also a historic form of housing. If you go to Galveston, Texas, everybody's got a back house, right? So because they needed that density. So there are a lot of different tools that we can bring to your attention and say, these are all the things that you could do if you like the concept of regulating redevelopment in established neighborhoods, or if you like the concept of regulating demolition in some way. We're not telling you what that way has to be, but if you're interested in doing those kinds of things, we can bring you a lot of different options for how you might consider it. And you might look at all those things and say, we've looked at all those options and now we're not really interested in it. Okay, that's fine. We're not asking you because we're already going to do it. And we're just trying to get you to give us, enough okays that we can feel good about ourselves when we bring you the plan that has that in it, right? And I've worked with communities that didn't want to have a historic preservation ordinance at all, but they did want to have some standards to prevent giant houses in their neighborhood. We can do that. We have a lot of tools in our toolbox. Did that answer your question? Okay, Mr. Rice.
Would you go back to the timeline for this project?
Yeah. I will give that a try. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry.
You went to the summer of 2022.
Yeah.
Who developed this kickoff with existing conditions analysis? Was it under the planning department before Britain came?
No, it was with Britain. She's provided a treasure trove of materials that we're honestly not all the way through all of the materials that she has shared with us, city planning documents, prior surveys, kind of what's going on in Fayetteville that we should be aware of coming into this planning effort.
Well, it seemed a little suspect to that, and let me just be very blunt here. We're supposed to provide you community engagement here, but you've already started. We don't know what you started with. That's why I questioned which planning director it was under and when it began. Now, we'll all take you at your, there's a chicken or egg thing. Something's got to start this process. If that's the egg, that's fine. But I don't want you to be operating under a former planning designer or developer of the city that wants to go in a particular direction, and suddenly we're now commenting on that instead of changing that plan. We've not seen that plan, none of us.
Mm-hmm. Well,
You're asking all of us in this room, and historians, people concerned about the historic neighborhoods and the two. You've already met with the two commissions, which I understand that they're part of the city, and I can see that you meeting with them before you met with the public, even though they're made of the public. But we were understood. I really understood this was supposed to be the egg tonight, and we're going to develop all this from there. But you're telling me now that you've already started.
Well, I think that there may be a misunderstanding about what all has occurred thus far, and I will clarify that there's not an existing plan. We're developing the city's first preservation plan, so we are not starting from a prior preservation plan document or any sort of agenda from the city. All we've received is, and I could probably pull up on this machine, like the documents that she has shared with us, and our staff has been going through what those documents are and summarizing them. And for example,
So we really don't know what the existing conditions analysis is yet.
right, and that will be a chapter in the preservation plan. We'll summarize all the documents that we looked at. For example, one thing we were looking at, and kind of as we were driving around this afternoon, was where have surveys occurred already? Where have designations occurred already on the map? And then are there holes in the map where we don't have a formal documentation for the properties in that area? So that's just one example of prior work that we're looking at and becoming familiar with. In terms of the document and its scope, And I think this is part of the public record is our contract, and this was awarded with a grant from the state, and they had a specific table of contents and things that needed to be covered in the plan. So that has been established as a framework for what the plan will look like, you know, to include an executive summary, a summary of the existing conditions, a summary of what we heard from the public, and then sections on recommendations and implementation. So those components of the plan have been established, but the content has not been developed.
My concern always is this. You're asking for the public's input. I was on this library board when we built this library. We had months and months and years of meetings and plans to develop this library for what the community wanted. Not what the board members wanted, not what the architects wanted to draw, not what the planners wanted to plan. And Fayetteville's a very engaging community. If you ask for the public's engagement, you need to be open and upfront when it starts and where it is, but don't come in here with a plan written and hope the public's going to join on with you, get on this wagon and ride out with you. That's a little disingenuous, I think, but there's not really.
Can I deal with that?
Yeah.
I think that's a little disingenuous.
So let me just, I think there's a misunderstanding here, Mr. Rice, because the existing analysis of conditions on the ground is part of our data gathering effort. Okay, so we need to know what has already happened in Fayetteville so we can understand, for example, when the Washington Willow Historic District was proposed, what happened that it didn't get through, right? We need to understand all of those nuances, and we need to know what information does the city already have. So, for example, Emily mentioned historic resources surveys. If we're going to identify places that we think you need to survey based on what we're seeing on the ground and what you tell us, because we're going to ask you what neighborhoods are important that could be historic districts, then we need to know what work has already been done. So that's what we mean when we're talking about an existing conditions analysis. We haven't written a plan for you. You know, we know what the sections are going to be because it's in our contract, but also because every preservation plan has the same sections. What they don't have is the same content, because the content comes from you all and it comes from the situation in your city. I've written a preservation plan for Corpus Christi, Texas, but I'm not bringing any of our ideas from Corpus Christi and saying, well, this is what we should do in Fayetteville. You know, we're starting from scratch with all of you. We're finding out what's going on in Fayetteville, what has been going on, and then we're asking you, what do you want to have happen now? And that's the conditions analysis and the community engagement. So there's nothing disingenuous about this process. It's all data collection. We're collecting data from you. We're collecting data from the city in terms of what has already happened here. But we don't have an agenda. So that's the thing. You know, this is not going to be about what we want. I mean, it's, you know, this has to be your plan. No, we're driving the ship. We are, so what Emily was saying is, because of the vast amount of information that they have received, our schedule is that the existing conditions analysis was supposed to be done in the summer. That's rolled over into fall a little bit just because we got so much stuff, okay? That's the whole reason. I mean, and this happens all the time. I'm doing a project up in Fort Collins, Colorado, and they gave us almost 10,000 documents to look through. I mean, it took us like 2 months to get through that. So yeah, I had thought we would be done in August with that. We're just getting done. Because we don't know when we start this how much stuff we're going to get. We always want as much as we can get. That's great. But so it's rolled over into this month. But there's nothing like shady, or we're not trying to get around anything. You know, we're just two ladies doing historic preservation, Mr. Rice, you know, trying to give you guys a preservation plan that reflects what you want. That's it. Yeah. That's why I called you personally. to talk to you. And I called Miss Hefner personally and 5 other people. And we asked both of the commissions to give us input on those same basic questions. This is the process of getting community input. We talk to people. We're having this meeting. You're all going to stick your stickers. We're going to have a community survey. We're going to wrap all of that information together and see what you told us. And then we're going to come back and tell you what you told us and let you give us feedback on that. Okay? We're good? All right. Ma'am in the overalls.
So, kind of going off that, you say you've already been talking to some entities and some organizations. What are some of those organizations? And then I'm personally asking, I work for Mount Sequoia, and I don't believe anyone's talked to us about this. I just found out about this meeting today, and I'm glad I did.
Oh, great.
So, I'm just curious to see what the scope of communication has been and how that's going out and kind of why we weren't asked.
Well, let me clear up a misunderstanding. We have not talked to organizations. So we have not gone out to the Clinton House Museum and the County Historical Society and Mount Sequoia, which we know is important, and organizations like that. Okay, we were tasked to talk to 7 individuals in the city who could tell us about historic preservation as it's happened over the years. Okay, we absolutely want to hear from Mount Sequoia. Okay, but what we have done so far has not involved organizations. Okay, so what else?
I have some other questions. Sorry.
Good.
You talked about funding and funding being part of the plan. Is that going to be coming through the city offices, city planning department? Is that the plan? And what are some ways to maybe streamline the process? Because I know, like, for example, the ARPA funds that nonprofits and other entities have applied for, it's just taken a really long time to establish. What's the process for applying? How do we apply? How do we evaluate? And city council still hasn't made a decision on if the emergency funds that were talked about for last year will be funded for this year. And so I want to see that, and I want to see funding methods established, but seeing it done to the city who's already overtaxed and already overworked and just has to create it from nothing, how is that going to work?
Okay, I'm going to answer 2 parts. Okay, first of all, the funding that's paying for this project is coming through the state primarily. It's a grant coming out of, and it's actually National Park Service money that comes through the state, through the Arkansas Heritage Preservation Program, then to cities that are certified local governments. Okay, so that's covered already. For things that we're recommending that you all go do, we're going to identify funding that could pay for that. Some of those things, like additional historic resources surveys, can be paid with the same grant funding that this project is being funded with. There are other ways of paying for things having to do with historic preservation. We're going to bring you a lot of best practices for how other cities are handling that. For example, if the city wanted to have a grant program that's focused on, for example, low-income homeowners to help them fix up and stay in their homes, we have colleagues who are doing that right now. And we can tell you how they did it, how it's been working over the last 15 years, right? And where the money comes from. In that case, it's from a percentage of city sales tax, I think, gets used for that. Or it's, no, I'm sorry. In Texas, we have a hotel occupancy tax that's similar to your hotel, motel, restaurant tax. And some cities have a pool of that, like your A&P commission has, and they decide to use some of that for historic preservation purposes because historic preservation does impact tourism. So we're going to be looking at all the different sources for financial support for these things. We're not just going to say, here's a bunch of ideas, good luck funding those, and scamper off back to Texas and never be seen from again. Thanks, we're going to cash your check now. That's not how it's going to go. So we're going to provide you with ideas for how things could be funded. But we're also going to be talking to the city. We're not going to come and say, you should have a bond issue. And then, the city is like, we are never going to have a bond issue. Right? So we're going to vet those ideas and make sure that what we put in the plan is realistic and is something that could actually get done here. Does that answer your question? Okay, ma'am, in the yellow. Okay, ma'am?
I have a question about educating the people of Fayetteville about its history and so forth. My understanding is that historic preservation is focused mainly on architecture, on buildings. And there's a whole lot of Fayetteville building history that is gone forever. But the history part, the culture and the kind of character that Fayetteville has is not well known to the incomers. It's hardly well known to people who've lived here a long time. And so I wonder if that educational component can be applied to non-architectural information.
So the question is, since historic preservation is traditionally very building focused, when it comes to educating people about Fayetteville's history, both people who already live here and incomers, how can preservation be used to bring in that fuller history that has nothing to do maybe with the buildings themselves? Is that okay? So historic preservation actually does a lot more than just building stuff. In fact, more and more, we're talking about important sites. We're talking about cultural properties, but we're also talking about what happened in the community development, the history of, places like Mount Sequoia that have nothing to, what's there now, the buildings become really a lens through which we can explore and understand this history. And I think that that's a really important role for historic preservation to play as a way to give people a way into history in a community. Because sometimes, you're right, when things have been lost, then it's harder to get people to imagine what was there, but we still have ways to do that in historic preservation as well. So I think that we can use historic preservation as a tool to accomplish some of those educational goals. And people walk past historic buildings every day. It's a really good opportunity to say, hey, do you know what happened here? There's a sidewalk decal that has some information with a QR code. You can take a picture of that with your phone, and it'll take you to a website where you can learn more if you're interested. And that way you can have self-guided walking tours, and those can be on apps on your phone where you can hear about things. In Austin, those are crowdsourced from the community. Individuals can help contribute to those and help create those. So there are all kinds of ways to involve the community, where it's not people like us who are historians saying, here's your history, let's tell you all about it. But you all saying, here are the things that are important to us that we want other people to know. But historic preservation can be a tool in your toolbox to make that happen. You're welcome. And we're going to bring you some examples of that when we get into heritage tourism. That's really where some of this education happens. But also, working with K through 12 schools and, the university and stuff like that. Ms. Hefner, do you have any questions? And sir?
I actually had a question about the historic tourism.
Okay.
If you could speak to that, and maybe heritage tourism, what the difference is. And also, just basically, is it viable now? And I ask that because I can remember for years our state tourism agency speakers would, I won't say they discouraged it, but they certainly threw shade on it. Like, you're not going to make a living in your community through historic, tourism. Is that the case now?
So let me just summarize that really briefly with what's the deal with heritage tourism? Does it work? Or historic tourism? Really, those are two different terms that we use for the same thing. Sometimes people, instead of saying historic preservation, they'll say heritage conservation. We're really talking about the same stuff, whether you say heritage or historic. Some people like the word heritage better. Some people like the word historic better. I'm agnostic. I'm just here to help get it done. So the question is, historic tourism or heritage tourism, does that work? Yes. In fact, there have been a ton of studies done by tourism people, not historic tourism people, but just plain old tourism people, your CVBs and, and your state tourism departments, that show that heritage tourists stay longer, spend more money, and come back, right? And the reason is that they want to come see more of your stuff. If you're a person who's coming for the football game, you're coming for the football game. And you're going to get done with the football game, and you're going to go home, right? You've come, you've done your one thing, you're out. If you have people who are coming who are interested in history and want to see all your historic stuff, you have so much for them to look at. You can't see all of that in one weekend. You're probably going to make it a long weekend. Maybe you'll come back a couple times during the year because you're still exploring that city. If you go down to Hot Springs, Arkansas, you see that in droves. Yes, you can go to the bathhouses. You can't get through all of them in a weekend. You're not going to go to Superior and, go to the brewery and stay in one of the other hotels. There's so much to do and see in little tiny Hot Springs because they've been doing historic preservation. Look at McCrory, little tiny McCrory. They're doing so much stuff with historic preservation because it brings people in. Heritage tourism, historic tourism works. But tourists want to do three things. They want to have an experience, they want to buy stuff, and they want to eat somewhere. Okay? Those three things. So if you can give them those things to do in your downtown, at Mount Sequoia when they come visit, wherever it is, if you can help make it easier for them to get there, if you can give them a self-guided walking tour on an app that's free on their phone where they can take themselves around, they don't have to sign up for something or plan in advance. You can make it easy for them to experience heritage tourism in your town. And that's what the really successful heritage tourism cities do. If you go to New Orleans, you can take 1 million cemetery tours. If you're a person who loves cemeteries and you want to go on tours, you could spend a week doing cemetery tours in New Orleans, and all those people have to be licensed to give cemetery tours because the city wants to make sure that they're not a bunch of quacks telling people, spooky stories or encouraging bad behavior in the cemeteries, right? We have enough trouble with that in cemeteries. But there are tons of places, and you don't have to be in New Orleans to benefit from this. Any place can benefit from historic tourism. So yes, I'm all for it. I think you have tremendous upside potential here. We can't wait to work with your CVB and talk about what can be done. And bring you examples of what other cities that are your size that have the same kind of stuff that you have are already doing and doing successfully. All right. Ma'am, I'm sorry you came in late. Do you have any questions?
I tried to do Zoom and it wouldn't work.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
People asked questions, I couldn't hear them, and so here I am, and I just have to be. But
That's okay. We'll be happy to talk to you about it afterwards. All right. Do we have some Zoom?
We do. We're not able to type the audio.
That's fine.
This
Okay.
So I am just going to allow you to.
Yay. Hello, Zoom people. Hi.
Echo too bad.
Let's see. Okay. So I have Margaret here. And how are you going to do this, Ryan?
So we have a couple options. She should be able to unmute and speak through the
Okay.
laptop. There might be a little bit of an echo. If that's a problem, then I think they've been emailing Britton their questions, so I've got their
Okay, can you
emails.
unmute her?
I can just ask.
Okay. Okay,
There she
all right,
is.
there you go, Margaret. What's your question?
Confusion on the part of the public that turned out today. And I also note that it's been very difficult historically for a wide part of Fayetteville to respond to simply the city website or the Speak Up. I'm wondering if there's a way to inform the public through
Okay, thank you, Margaret. So Margaret's question was, there was some confusion about the meeting today, about this process. People on Zoom apparently had some trouble hearing, et cetera, et cetera. How can the city reach out directly to people rather than asking people to come to it? I think that's what you're asking. So Margaret, let me just say, we're going to talk to the city about that and see what we can come up with. But if you will provide in the chat or send to Britton Bostick, whose contact information is up here on the slide, if you will send her your email address or phone number, get a hold of her, then we'll get back to you directly, personally, okay?
Questionnaire at the invitation of one of the city council members and Britain. So she has my contact information, and I would love to hear from her.
Great. We'll talk to her and we'll get back to you. Thank you very much for that question. One more. And then I'm going to ask you guys about that too. Sorry, you all. I'm from the north. I'm going to ask you all. Yeah, all y'all. The plural.
Sharon had previously had her
Okay.
I don't see it right now.
Oh, she's right there. Hey, Miss Killian, what's your question or comment?
Gentrification continues on a fast pace, and it has always impacted the Black community. I'd say we're lucky that there's anything left of it, and it is the last one in Northwest Arkansas. I would like to know if there's a way, while we're talking about the preservation, is building, is gentrification continuing to happen? Are things happening up along the hill of Belsevoya, or, and pushing from all directions, as it has been for all of these years, to where we'll end up disappearing before we are able to do any kind of preservation, so to speak, as I should say, preservation of structures that had significant historical meaning for Black people, but was never recognized. So places are disheveled and run down. But so that's my question. Are we going to be able to survive before we finish? You help us.
Okay. So Ms. Killian's question, if I may summarize, is African American people have historically been adversely impacted by gentrification, by development, by segregation, redlining, all kinds of discrimination that has made it very difficult. And I'm adding my own stuff here now. This is not all stuff she said. That's made it very difficult for the Black community to own land, to own property, to preserve it, to not be forced out of their own neighborhoods for a road or redevelopment or whatever. And gentrification is just the current version of that. And it's happening because African American neighborhoods traditionally, not fairly, but historically have been undervalued compared to white neighborhoods because they're often underappraised. That makes them targets for developers who want to come in, buy that property at a low price, and then build something. And now that neighborhood becomes difficult for people to live in because property values are higher. We talked about land being valued for its development potential, et cetera. And so what happens in a lot of cases, and we certainly have seen some of that already in our tour just today, is these traditionally African American neighborhoods that are being gentrified. And So, and it's tricky because we also know that African Americans have been prevented in many ways by our federal and state and city governments from accumulating generational wealth through land ownership. So you don't want to prevent somebody from selling their property and gaining wealth through that land ownership, right? So I think it's really, really tricky question. And I'm not saying that you asked the question to be tricky, Miss Killian, but I think it's really complicated and difficult. Now, what she was asking is, are you going to move fast enough with this preservation plan so that something can get done for the African American community before everything is erased? Because that's where it's headed right now in Fayetteville. And I think we can certainly make every effort to prioritize and focus on that specific challenge, that specific problem. Now, I know that development is rampant, and so can we move fast enough? I don't know. But I know that we're moving as fast as we can with this plan, and we're certainly going to be giving attention to that very specific issue. So I hope, Ms. Killian, that that answers your question enough for now, and we want to continue having this conversation with you going forward. Okay, you're welcome. All right, what else? Any other questions? ¿Qué más? Well, thank you all for coming. Please come stick your stickers on our posters, vote. If you have other questions, if you want to just talk to us after, that's fine. We'd love to talk to you. I literally will stay until they drag me out of the building. So please feel free to come and talk to us about whatever you want to. Thanks so much, everyone on Zoom. Thank you for being here. Have a good night.